Wyoming Territory, January 1881. The snow had fallen hard the night before, thick and fast, covering the high plains in a silence so deep it rang in the ears. Olivia Kessler ran through it anyway, boots soaked and fingers stiff with cold, the wind biting her cheeks raw. She did not look back. She could still feel his hand on her wrist, still hear Mr. Danton shouting behind her as she slipped out the back door of the boarding house kitchen with nothing but her coat, a burlap sack, and the bruises he gave her. The cold clawed at her lungs as she pushed past the last fence post and into the open fields. There was no plan, just away. Away from the man who had forced her to scrub floors in the dark, cook for guests who leered, and sleep in the pantry like she was worth less than a mule. She had stayed too long already. Too long since her mother died. Too long since she believed she could leave. But when Mr. Danton slammed her against the wall that morning and told her she owed him her body now too, something had snapped clean through. By nightfall, her steps were dragging. The snow came to her knees in places. Her coat was soaked through, the sack with her mother's brooch and a crust of bread clenched to her chest. She could not feel her toes. Her body wanted to fold and sleep. But she kept walking. Then she fell. Her legs gave out on a slope, and she slid down into a shallow gully, landing hard. She did not rise. The snow covered her slowly, and she let her head drop onto her arm. She did not remember closing her eyes. Truett Zayne spotted the dark shape under the snow just after dawn. He was riding the north fence line of his ranch, reins loose in one hand, his breath a cloud in the air. He had not expected to find a woman half buried in the drift. At first, he thought she was dead. He leapt off his horse, knelt down, and brushed the snow from her face. Her lips were blue, her skin like wax. But when he pressed 2 fingers to her neck, he felt it a faint thud, steady and slow. "Hold on," he muttered. "You hold on." He scooped her up in his arms. She was light, too light, bones under soaked cloth. Her head lolled against his shoulder. He got her on the saddle in front of him, wrapped her in his duster, and kicked the gelding into a run. His cabin was 2 miles off. He held her upright the whole way. The stove was lit fast and hot. Truett laid her on the cot by the fire, peeled off her frozen coat and boots, and wrapped her in every blanket he had. He did not waste time wondering who she was. He had seen too many winters out here to hesitate. He warmed water, made broth, and rubbed her hands and feet until color returned. When her eyes opened, hours later, they were wide and startled. She tried to sit up, but her arms gave out, and she gasped. "Easy," Truett said from the chair beside her. "You are safe now. You were near frozen. I found you yesterday." Her gaze flicked to the fire, then to him. "Where am I?" "My place. About 30 miles west of Laramie." She looked around, throat tight. She touched the blanket. "You live out here alone?" He nodded. "Name is Truett Zayne." She swallowed. "Olivia Kessler." He nodded again. "You hungry, Olivia?" She nodded, eyes glassy, and she did not argue when he helped her sit up and brought her the cup of broth. Her hands trembled as she drank, but she did not spill. By the next morning, she was stronger. She sat up on her own, wrapped in a wool shawl, watching the snow drift outside the window like it was something she had never seen before. "You want to tell me what happened?" Truett asked gently. He was by the stove, stirring beans. Olivia looked down at her lap. "I worked for a man in Laramie. He owned a boarding house. My mother worked there before she passed. He said I owed him for her debts. I cooked and cleaned. Then he started touching me." Truett's hand tightened around the spoon. "I left. I ran." He nodded once. "You did right." She looked at him, eyes round. "You believe me?" "I do." The silence stretched, warm now. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded again. "You can stay here until you figure what comes next." Her mouth trembled. "I do not have anywhere to go." "Then you stay as long as you need." Days passed. The storm lifted. Olivia's cheeks grew pink again, her voice stronger. She helped around the cabin when she could, peeling potatoes, folding linens, brushing the horse. Truett watched her quietly, never pushing. He liked the way she hummed under her breath when she worked. The way she looked out at the field like she was searching for something she had never seen before. He had not had anyone in his cabin in years. Not since he left Texas after the war. Not since he buried his brother. He had built this life out of silence and hard work. He never thought he would want someone in it again. But Olivia fit. She laughed one morning when the goat chased her and hid behind him like a child. His heart twisted in his chest. One night, 2 weeks after he found her, they sat by the fire, both with mugs of tea. Outside, the wind howled, but inside was warm. "I thought I was going to die out there," she said softly. "But you did not. No, you found me." He looked over. Her eyes were full of something he could not name, but it pulled at him. "You saved me," she whispered. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. She let him. "I am glad I did." She leaned her head on his shoulder. He did not move for a long time. In the spring, when the snow melted and the grass came back green, Olivia stood on the porch of the cabin, barefoot, sun on her face. Truett came up behind her, arms crossed. "I can build you a house. Right next to this one, if you want your own space." She turned to him, eyes soft. "I do not want my own space." His heart beat hard once. "I want yours." He stepped closer. "You sure?" She reached up, touched his face. "I love you, Truett." He kissed her then, slow and steady like a man who had waited his whole life to find something worth holding on to. And she kissed him back, like she had found a home. They stood there until the sun dipped low, holding each other, both of them warm now. The ground softened by mid-April. Mud slicked the low paths, and the creek near the sycamores carried more sound than it had in months. Olivia stood in the doorway early one morning, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a tin basin at her feet, and her hair pinned back in a way that kept the wind from tangling it. She had learned how to patch a saddle and use a draw knife without blistering her palms. Her hands no longer shook when she reached for something. She had stopped jumping when the door opened. Truett stepped up beside her, wiping his hands on a rag. "Fence needs mending along the south pasture. You want to ride out with me? I won't slow you down." He gave a quiet nod. "Didn't say you would." They rode out after breakfast, the sun still low enough to cast long shadows over the grass. She rode beside him, not behind, her posture easy in the saddle. He watched her from the corner of his eye as she scanned the horizon, face calm, hat low over her brow. Beneath the calm, though, something stirred, he could feel it. Not fear exactly, but a question she hadn't yet spoken. They reached the fence near a stand of cottonwoods. He dismounted first, then handed her the wire nippers before reaching for the post-hole digger. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the scrape of wood against soil and the rustle of a distant hawk. "After a while," she said, "did you ever think about leaving Wyoming?" He sank the digger into the earth again, then paused. "Once, right after the war. Thought I'd head west, maybe California. Never did." "Why not?" "My brother's grave is here." She crouched to check the wire tension, not looking at him. "He was younger?" "By 3 years. Got himself caught in a cattle theft gone wrong. I was too late getting to him." She set down the nippers, brushed her hands on her skirt. "You talk about him like you've made peace with it." "I haven't." He didn't say more. She didn't ask. They finished the fence before the sun reached its peak, then rode the long way back through a coulee lined with sage. A jackrabbit darted across their path, and she laughed not loudly, just enough for him to hear it over the wind. He didn't smile, but something eased in his chest. That evening, she stood at the work table, pressing dough into a pie tin. He sat nearby, oiling the rifle he'd cleaned that morning. The lamplight softened the lines of her face, and her voice, when it came, was thoughtful. "Do you ever get letters?" "Not in years." "Would you want to?" He looked up. "Should I be expecting one?" She wiped flour from her fingers, then leaned against the table's edge. "I've been thinking I ought to write to my aunt in Kansas. Tell her I'm alive." "You think she'd want to know?" "She was kind to me once. Before everything went wrong." He considered that. "Then you should write her." She studied him a moment, the back of her hand resting against her cheek. "You don't talk much, Truett." He set the rifle aside. "Never saw the point in saying what isn't needed. But you listen." "I do. I like that about you." He stood slowly and crossed the room, stopping just close enough for her to feel the heat off his skin. "You can stay here as long as you want, Olivia. But if you're thinking about going east again, I'm not." They were quiet a long time. The pie sat forgotten on the table, the scent of flour and lard thick in the air. "I don't want what's easy," she said at last. "I want what's true." He reached out then, touched the side of her face. His hand was calloused and warm, and he didn't speak. He didn't have to. Later, after the pie cooled and the fire burned low, she lay beneath the quilt in Truett's bed, the cabin still around them. Outside, A coyote cried once and was answered from far off. In the quiet that followed, she felt his hand find hers beneath the covers. "I ain't used to sharing the quiet," he said. She turned toward him in the dark. "Then we'll learn it together." And they did. By late May, the land turned gold in the evenings. The cottonwoods filled out, thick with green, and the creek ran clearer than it had in months. Olivia had taken to keeping a journal, writing in its slow, careful lines at the end of each day. She never let Truett read it, but sometimes she'd pause mid-sentence, glance toward him where he sat on the porch sharpening tools, and smile just a little like she was writing something true about him. One morning, he handed her a folded scrap of paper. His handwriting was blocky, uneven. "Supply train's due in from Cheyenne. I'll still need to ride in for feed and flour. Figured you might want to come." She took it, brow lifting. "You never said you traded there." "Only when I have to. But there's a saddle shop there." "Thought maybe you'd want to look at tack." "I don't need anything." "Didn't say need. Said want." They left at first light the next day, riding double on the sorrel gelding with a pack mule trailing behind. The air carried the sharp scent of pine and the faint sweetness of blooming chokecherry. Olivia didn't speak much, but she watched everything: the distant ridgelines, the scattered homesteads, the way the trail widened as it neared town. Cheyenne was louder than she remembered. Men called to one another from wagons. A boy chased a stray chicken through the street. A woman in a calico skirt leaned out of a storefront and shouted something in German. Olivia's fingers curled slightly against the saddle horn, but Truett's hand settled over hers just once, a quiet anchor. They tied up near a feed store and stepped inside. The man behind the counter was older, with a crooked back and sharp eyes that flicked between them. "Didn't expect to see you, Zayne. Didn't expect to come." The man nodded. "That your wife?" Olivia felt her chest still. Truett didn't answer right away. Then, steady, almost. The man grunted and turned to measure flour. Outside, Olivia adjusted her shawl. "You didn't have to say it like that." He looked over at her, squinting against the sun. "Would you rather I hadn't?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into the saddle shop while he loaded the mule. The air inside smelled of leather and oil. A woman behind the counter, gray-haired, eyes sharp as an awl, watched her come in. "You ranch?" "Not exactly," Olivia said. "You ride like you do." Olivia ran her fingers along a bridle, the stitching tight and clean. "I help someone who does." "Well," the woman said, "you've got the hands of someone who works, not just rides." Olivia glanced down at her palms. They weren't always like this. No one's are. At first, after they left town, Olivia rode beside Truett in silence for a long time, her new bridle stowed in the mule's pack. Near a bend in the trail, she said, "You meant it, didn't you?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "Ain't a word I'd use lightly." She nodded, eyes on the path ahead. "I never thought I'd be wanted in that way." He reined in, stopping the horse, and looked at her full. "You're wanted in every way, Olivia." She held his gaze, cheeks flushed from sun and something else. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, slow and certain, her hand resting at his collar. When they reached home, the light was long and low. She unpacked the mule while he put up the feed. Then, without a word, she took his hand and led him inside. That night, she didn't go to the cot by the hearth. She lay beside him beneath the same quilt, and when the wind rose, she didn't stir. His hand rested at her waist, steady. In the dark, she whispered, "I want this. All of it." He pressed his lips against her temple. "Then it's yours, so long as I can give it." And in that quiet, between breath and heartbeat, something settled between them, rooted, whole, and lasting. June heat settled gentle and slow across the valley, the kind that softened the edges of everything. Grass stretched tall near the creek, and the horses dozed in the shade by mid-morning. Olivia had begun rising early, before the sun cleared the ridge, to knead sourdough and fetch water from the spring. She no longer asked where she fit here. Her hands moved through the work like they belonged to the land. Truett found her one evening pulling weeds from between the garden rows, her skirt hem dusted and hair coming undone at the nape. He crouched beside her and set a small wooden box on the ground between them. "Found this in the back corner of the barn. Figured it might have been my mother's." Olivia wiped her brow with the inside of her wrist before lifting the lid. Inside, nestled in old cotton batting, lay a set of bone-handled sewing tools, a blue pincushion, and a silver thimble dulled with age. She was a seamstress? No. Just stitched things because they needed stitching. Olivia ran her fingertips over the thimble. She keep house out here? He shook his head. Only visited once. My folks stayed in Texas. She didn't get to see this place finished. She would have liked it. He didn't answer. She didn't press. That night, Olivia stitched a tear in Truett's spare shirt using the old thread from the box. She worked by lamplight while he read from a dog-eared farming almanac, the corners of the cabin quiet and still. I was thinking, she said without looking up, we could dig another row for beans. The soil's rich near the fence line. He closed the book. We can do that. I'll need to ask Mrs. Loring in Cheyenne about preserving. She's got a cellar and says she knows how to keep carrots good through winter. We'll build one. A root cellar. Before the frost sets in again. She looked over, needle pausing midair. You already thinking of next winter? He leaned back in the chair, one arm resting over the back. I think about every season now. You're in all of them. She set the shirt aside, her eyes finding his in the lamplight. You ever think you'd have a life like this? No, do you want it? I do. She stood slowly, crossed to him, and placed her hand against his chest. Then we'll keep building it. One day at a time. Early the next week, a rider came up the north trail, dust rising behind him. Olivia was tending to the chickens when she saw the bay gelding crest the rise. She wiped her hands and stepped toward the porch as Truett emerged from the barn, brow furrowed. The rider was lean, older, with a patchy beard and a crooked gait as he dismounted. He greeted Truett with a nod, then tipped his hat to Olivia. I'm looking for Truett Zayne. You found him, Truett said. Name's Garrett Sloan. I rode dispatch with your brother. Back in '64. Truett's mouth tightened. You knew Wyatt? I did. He saved my hide more than once. Heard what happened. I only came through this way now, 'cause I was headed west, and thought maybe I'd pay respects. Truett motioned to the bench on the porch. You're welcome to rest a spell. They sat out front with mugs of cool water while Olivia listened from the steps, quiet but present. Garrett looked out toward the pasture. He used to say he'd have land one day. Said you were the one who'd make it happen. Truett nodded once. He helped me build the first cabin wall. He talked about you like you were already settled. Like he was just catching up. When Garrett rode on that evening, Olivia followed Truett to the far edge of the property, where the grass gave way to a soft rise marked with a single cedar cross. She knelt beside it, brushing away the wind-blown stems. You never told me how he died. I didn't want to give pain shape. She stood slowly, her hand brushing his. Maybe it's time you did. Truett looked out at the horizon, jaw tight. He was trying to get a colt out of a ravine. Roped it wrong, slipped. Broke his back. I got to him, but not in time. She didn't speak. Only reached for his fingers, lacing them with hers. He knew horses better than anyone I've met, Truett said. Shouldn't VE happened. Some things just do. They stood there until the sky turned orange and the wind shifted cool. That night, she left her journal open on the table. The page read only one sentence. He carries sorrow like river stones, quiet and heavy, but never dropped. In July, they built the cellar with boards salvaged from the old shed and stone carried one at a time from the creek bed. Olivia lined the shelves with clean muslin. Truett reinforced the door with iron hinges. They worked side by side, wordless often, but in rhythm. And when the first thunderstorm rolled in from the west, Olivia stood in the middle of the room they'd made from dirt and stone and said, We'll be safe here. Truett, watching her from the stairs, replied, We already are. August came with dry heat and a sky so wide it seemed to press low on the hills. The cabin walls held it at bay, but the fields thirsted, and the creek pulled back into itself, quieter each day. Olivia tied her apron high and spent most mornings with a bucket and dipper, walking the rows of beans and squash, watching for signs of blight. Truett split fence rails in the shade when he could find it, shirt damp across the shoulders, his brow lined deeper than usual. One afternoon, she found him at the south edge of the pasture, standing still with a length of rope slack in his palm. A dun-colored mare stood a few paces off, sides heaving, her hind leg lifted awkwardly. She came in lame last night, he said when Olivia stepped beside him. Stepped wrong in the arroyo, best I can tell. Will she bear weight again? He shook his head slightly. Not for work. Might carry light if she heals right. Olivia took the rope from his hand and moved slowly toward the mare, her voice low. She didn't reach for the halter until the horse's eyes softened. Truett watched her, quiet as ever, but something in his jaw eased. She likes you, he said. She just needed to be seen. They limped the mare back to the paddock together, and that night, Olivia soaked linen strips in vinegar and wrapped the leg while Truett steadied the lantern. Neither spoke, but when she leaned back on her heels, he reached down and touched a curl that had fallen across her cheek. I never knew how much I needed another pair of hands, he said. She looked up at him. Not just hands. No, he said. Not just. In early September, a letter arrived. Olivia found it tucked beneath the flour sack on the porch bench, the ink faded from sun. She broke the wax with care and read it standing, lips pressed tight. When she finished, she folded it twice and held it out to Truett. It's from my aunt, the one in Kansas. Said she'd like to meet you. He took the letter but didn't unfold it. You thinking of going? She wants to visit. When the weather cools. Will you want her to stay? I think she's lonely, but I don't think she's looking to be taken in. Just remembered. He nodded once and passed the letter back. She'll be welcome here. The days shortened. Olivia began laying up preserves on the cellar shelves, pears, mixed pickles, and wild plum jam, so thick it barely spread. Truett built a set of shelves inside the cabin, smooth-planed and sturdy. She filled them with folded linens, her mother's brooch in a small wooden box, and a tin of dried lavender she'd gathered herself. That evening, while the last light faded behind the ridge, she stood in the doorway brushing flour from her skirt. Would you mind if I asked something? Truett looked up from the table. You never need to ask permission. She stepped closer. Do you think we ought to be married before winter? He set down his fork. I've thought so since midsummer. She smiled, slow and sure. Then let's do it before the first frost. They married under the cottonwoods near the creek, the trees just beginning to turn. The preacher from Fort Sanders came on horseback, his Bible wrapped in oilskin. Olivia wore a dress she'd sewn herself deep green with narrow cuffs, and Truett wore his best shirt, pressed flat and buttoned to the collar. They stood facing each other with only the preacher, the mare grazing nearby, and the breeze in the grass to bear witness. I don't promise a perfect life, Truett said as he held her hands. Only a true one. And steady. Olivia's voice was low but clear. I promise to walk beside you, whatever the road. The preacher said the words, and they spoke them back. Truett kissed her with both hands on her waist, and she held to him like the ground wouldn't hold her otherwise. That night, they returned to the cabin and lit every lamp. She set the table with their best dishes, and he poured cider into 2 tin cups. They sat long after the plates were cleared, fingers laced together, the quiet between them full and easy. I didn't think I'd ever start again, she said, her head resting against his shoulder. You didn't, he said. You kept going. Snow came late that year. The first flakes fell while Olivia stitched mittens by the fire, her belly rounded beneath her apron. Truett carved a cradle from pine, smoothing each edge with care. He never rushed the work. When the baby came in the spring, a girl with dark hair and her mother's quiet eyes, Truett held her like he'd done it all his life. Olivia watched from her bed, the morning sun warming her face. What should we call her, he asked. She reached for his hand. Call her Mercy, for all we were given. He looked down at the child, then back at Olivia. Mercy Zayne, he said. That'll do. The days that followed were not always easy, but they were theirs. Olivia taught Mercy to walk among the rows of beans, to speak soft to horses, to listen before she judged. Truett showed her how to read the weather in the clouds, how to sharpen a blade, how to speak truth and mean it. And when the girl laughed, they both looked up every time. The cabin stood through years of wind and rain. The garden grew thick with each passing season, and the fences held. They built nothing grand, but everything they made held fast. In the end, it was not the storms or hard winters that shaped them, but the steady days, the shared glances, the warm meals, the hands found in the dark that never let go. They lived long, and they lived well, together.